Open your mind to Dungeons & Dragons computer game from Mattel Electronics. It will lead your imagination down a dungeon labyrinth wherein lies the dragon's treasure. Steal his treasure, but make no false moves. For in Dungeons & Dragons, a dead end is a dead end. Dungeons & Dragons from Mattel Electronics.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here. And if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
EDS, managing the complexities of e-business.
There is a great evil in our land. The vile necromancer Mort Kemner has discovered mask of death.
You are trespassing on these lands. These lands belong to the king.
Your reign of terror ends here.
By the light of Theron you shall fall.
You can't use a lightsaber! It's not even the right system!
Let's roleplay through this.
I'm just playing my alignment.
That was a decidedly evil act.
You see, I add my int and dex bonuses to my crit range, and I get an extra attack every time I land a critical hit.
Why are you wearing a dress?
What? Oh yeah, right.
Tag!
Lose 50 experience.
So, what happens next?
Onward to Waffles! Waffles ho!
Everyone could use more heroic fantasy adventure in their lives. And with a few of your friends and a little imagination, you can find it. Dungeons & Dragons 4th Edition. Check it out at dndinsider.com. Get together, roll some dice, have fun.
Okay, so before the D&D lynching begins, because I dared to put a 4th edition commercial in, D&D doesn't do commercials all that often, and that commercial was so great, I was like, screw it, it's going in. So go get your whatever version of D&D you like. But I'm sorry, a beholder in everyday life, that's just top tier quality of humor for me. So,
yeah, but whatever edition of D&D your group is having fun with is the right edition of D&D.
Exactly. But yes, I love that commercial so much, and I had to put it in. But hi, everybody. Welcome back to Pop Pop Con Con. This is tips and tricks for Dungeons & Dragons, the DM edition. We have a fantastic group of panelists here. My name is Sean. I am one half of Pop Psycho Baubles. My wife, Laura, is the other half. She should be fairly soon be in the chat room. So if you have any comments, feel free to put them up. We'll be more than happy to go ahead and put them on screen. And I would like to go ahead. We had some during the pre-roll that we had here, which was, we had one that was, I had that D&D game as a kid, that little electronic one. I saw it. I never had it. I wish I did. We also had a really great one about Darkness Rising, which was, I was obsessed with it back in the day. I still am. But we have a whole crew
It was me, Sean.
Was it you?
It was me.
Oh, was it you? Well, then I'm sorry. I didn't realize that was you. So that's okay.
It's true. You know, it's true, though. It's no less true. And I'm happy to highlight my love of Dead Gentlemen. It's fine.
So let's go ahead and start introducing everybody. To directly my screen left is going to be my buddy Jeff. Jeff, if you don't mind, please say hello and introduce yourself to everybody.
Hi, I'm Jeff Mueller, aka the Mighty Jerd on the Twitters and all that jazz. I'm an actor, a writer, a martial arts and fitness guy, and I love the crap out of Dungeons and Dragons. I started playing back in 1980, and I've been enamored with role-playing games ever since.
Fantastic. And then to his immediate left is going to be Anne, who also is, Hearthsinger Games?
It's true. That's Hearthsinger Games. Yeah.
There you go. So please, thank you for being here and let everybody know about you a little bit.
Sure. So, hi, guys. I'm Anne Richmond, a.k.a. Hearthsinger, the head bard in charge. And I stream tabletop RPGs and story-focused games on my Twitch channel, Hearthsinger Games. I put out weekly D&D-focused content on YouTube at youtube.com/Anne Richmond. I play Astrid on the Lost Mountain Saga, which is a Vassan actual play podcast, and Captain Amaru Kiyuka on the Starfound Starfinder podcast. And I am a producer over at the Glass Cannon Network.
You know what? You have nothing on your schedule. You need to do more stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the life of I literally want to burn in hell for saying this sentence, but professional content creator, you're just everything to all people. I don't
you killed Jeff. You magic missiled his heart. Like, he's done.
I'm so sorry, Jeff. That's what I do. This is what I do full time. I talk about D&D, and it's not a bad way to go.
No, absolutely not. But directly to your south is Michael, who was on with us some last night, and fantastic guy. Michael, if you don't mind, say hello to the audience and let them know a little bit about you, please.
Sure. Hey, I'm Michael G. Williams. I write award-winning science fiction, horror, and urban fantasy. I started playing games with friends in my fraternity house in the mid-'90s and have been active more or less off and on in the same two gaming groups ever since.
Wow.
I wrote background and setting material for the 20th anniversary edition of Wraith the Oblivion, and I co-host the Unexplained and Weird Stuff podcast, Arcane Carolinas.
Very cool. By the way, that is a deep cut going for Wraith the Oblivion. We'll get to that in a little while, but that is not an easy game to play or to story master. That's a rough one.
I have never met a game system that I don't like.
Right.
I'll give anything a shot. And the storyteller system is probably the best, most playable game system ever created. So,
You know what? I will definitely agree with that. It definitely has a lot of flexibility. But before we get into all the mechanical stuff that we're going to deal with during this hour, let's go ahead and finish up our panelists. To your screen right is going to be Miss Kimi. Kimi, hello. Welcome for your first show. And let us know a little bit about you.
Hi, my name is Kimi. I go by Golden Lasso Girl on the internets. I run the Happy Jacks RPG network. So all our podcasts and streams, been doing that for over a decade now. So it's old school AP back in the day. Played Dungeons and Dragons and a billion other systems. And currently I have Golden Lasso Games, which is my game company where I make a bunch of weird indie games that all use dice and lots of fun. But yeah, it's a little bit of everything in the tabletop community.
I dig it. And then rounding out our panelists, you probably saw him just a little while ago when we were talking about the Ultimate Final Girls. It is my buddy, Gary. Gary, welcome back, sir. Let everybody know a little bit about you. Words are hard.
My name is Gary Mitchell. I'm a writer, reviewer, podcaster, voice actor.
It still says no, don't stand over here. It still says can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. What's up?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was muted. I apologize.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. I'll tell you what, I'll mute you. Here, I'll mute you for you. Here you go. There you go. Now Kimmy's muted so she can have her conversation. Go ahead, Gary. I'm sorry.
My name is Gary Mitchell. I am a writer, reviewer, podcaster. I am the co-director of the American Sci-Fi Classics track at Dragon Con. You can find me on the Twitters here. Yes, Star Trek fans, it's my real name. I have been gaming since middle school when I discovered fighting fantasy books, and I played the D&D based ones, and my first actual game system where I was game master was DC Heroes.
Wow.
In 87, 88. So I've been at this a while.
Fantastic.
And Michael, you and I need to talk about storyteller system because there are times it makes my brain bleed.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good information that we could talk to. But before we get to systems.
Oh, and I brought another friend.
Oh, a Mind Flayer. Yes.
Nice.
Love it. But before we get into specific systems, I do want to do a little bit at the top here, just to say that all this that we're about to talk about is not necessarily going to strictly be for D&D. This can more than likely be rules that you can apply to any system. So if you're not a fan of D&D, if you're a fan of, say, the storyteller system, or if you're a fan of like the Palladium system, or whatever system you tend to glob onto, just feel free to adapt these suggestions, because in general, good DM or GM tips are universal. These are not usually system specific. They're actually agnostic to system. But with that started, I do have a question for the panel, and I'll do a round robin here. And we'll start with Jeff. And the question is for each of you, what would be your number one rule for new DMs that you would suggest to make for a better game?
Oh man. Okay, so there's a lot of things people generally focus in on when it comes to this. I'm going to go a little more conceptual. Okay. I think there's a ton of different skills that play into providing a positive game mastering experience, and it can be overwhelming for new DMs.
Definitely.
My tip is to identify 2 things you want to improve on and focus on them. Find one thing you're really good at least that you think so, and work on making it better. And then find the thing that you were the worst at and try and bring that up a little bit. And if you focus on something that you're good at and can focus on that, you're going to feel good about providing a good experience. You're not going to get that imposter syndrome like, oh, I'm terrible at this. Because you're focusing on the thing you're good at, but also realize there are going to be things you suck at. So just dive in early and identify them and try and bring the level of those up as well.
I think that's actually really good advice. How about you, Anne? What would you think is like your number one piece of advice for new game masters or dungeon masters?
I think a lot of people get hung up on being so precious about the story they want to tell. And I think it's really important from my point of view. Again, I know not everybody might agree with this, but from my point of view, that you recognize that you are here almost really to serve the story and to serve your players. That doesn't mean let them get away with anything they want to do, but it's important that you have a session 0 that's not just about creating characters, but where you ask them, what kind of story are you interested in telling? What kind of story do you not want to tell at all? Because it's everything from a spectrum of getting people involved in a game that's going to be total dungeon crawl versus a more open world adventure or political intrigue, versus you could end up really hurting somebody at your table if you don't understand what their X cards are, what their triggers are, and talk about that. And I think the problem with treating that session and the importance of session 0 without enough gravitas is you don't know that you effed up until it's too late.
Yeah, and that actually is a really good point, is being aware of your players. Having the sensitivity to what they want to do is incredibly important. But I would like to tack on one little addendum to that, which is you're also a player at that game. And the players need to understand what you hope to do as well. So it is a little bit of a dialogue where all parties involved need to understand that you're not the enemy. You're just you're quote unquote everybody else. And
you need to be able to express that as well. You need to be a good communicator, because you need to be able to express, like, if you're really passionate about this concept that you already have had, and that's the story that you want to do at the table, then you need to be able to express that to them so that someone can say, I'm not sure this is the table for me, because you'll be much happier playing a different game with them later than you will surprising them with that. And then them finding out that this is, a dark, like, if someone doesn't want to play a dark horror game, don't be like, surprise, you're playing Strahd. Like, that's not.
Don't show up to a Shoots and Ladders game ready to play Axis and Allies.
Exactly. Yeah, basically, right?
Yeah.
You thought you're playing checkers and somebody busts out, Settlers of Catan. You're like, oh crap, I mean, it could definitely be a system shock. But that's a fantastic suggestion, absolutely. So directly below you, let's go to Michael. Michael, what would be like your number one suggestion for new DMs and game masters?
I'm tempted to say, can Anne just re-say everything that she just said because she's so right? But major agreement. But instead, what I'm going to say is have side characters, NPCs, who have their own arcs. like let them grow and change, and let the same NPCs show up at different points in the story, at different points in time, in different places, because that's a way to make the world feel really alive. And it gives the players the sense that like the world that they're playing in is reliable and persists, and that they can go back to people and draw on resources and refer to things that have happened in the past, and those will be reliably present and accessible to them. You want to make sure to give your players an inventory of story elements that they know that they can reach into the bag too, and use some of the toys and use some of the tricks. And it gives you a bunch of opportunities as a DM to let those NPCs have various like heel face turns and things like that. If those characters show up and they change and they grow and you know their abilities develop, or they like, you know, whatever happens, they lose their family, they gain a family, whatever.
Right.
That's a way to make the players feel like the world around them is moving with them through the story.
And you know what the big bonus to that, Michael, is when you have characters that continually show back up, it stops making all new characters suspicious, because that's a problem that a lot of new DMs have. They introduce a bunch of faceless NPCs, and inevitably somebody in that NPC crowd is the bad guy, right? And so then they meet another
one with a name.
Right. And so the one with the name is always the one with the bad guy. But if you introduce multiple people and they're all interesting characters, and they may only show up for 3 minutes, you start to, and I hate to say it like this, you start to basically create a world that is less suspicious, which means that when you do drop the hammer, because let's be fair, we are playing more or less a type of mystery normally, when that character does heel turn, like you said, it's like, oh, I wasn't suspecting him. I was suspecting Earl down the street, you know? So it allows the DM to have more flexibility so they're not predictable. And it also hopefully gets players away from being murder hobos, where as soon as they meet somebody, kill him, he's the bad guy.
It's a way to remind the players also that the world includes consequences for action.
Exactly.
And if those NPCs face consequences, they're going to remember that they can face consequences also. But also creates opportunities for them to be the consequences that occur to those NPCs. It's just a way to keep things really dynamic. When I was making notes before this, I listed off a ton of TV shows that do a really good job of having side characters who like grow and develop. I will not spend the next 10 minutes listing them for you, but I will say,
just give us one. Give us one.
Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which we're going to talk about next.
Yep, that was the one I was going for too. Yeah, absolutely, yes. See, we're simpatico. I like
segue.
Yeah. So if you want to, yeah. And speaking of which, if you're not around at 3:00, you should be, because we're going to be talking about Deep Space Nine. But before we move on to Kimmy's answer, I do want to say we do have a really great comment from the comment gallery, which is, "Look at my handsome boy Jack."
Aww.
And then my wife decided to tee up on that and say his beard is looking like. So, yeah, you know what? Actually, all the gentlemen here have some nice beards going on. So, gentlemen,
you know when you're right, you're right, and like we can't stand in the way of that.
Of good bearding.
Of
so
the truth.
Just beard deserves its own panel.
Yeah,
there you go. Yes,
the truth is out there.
There should be a beard panel. I'm sorry, I derailed myself. Kimmy, what would be your number one suggestion for new DMs and GMs?
Totally fine. You can derail for excellent beard content.
Okay, great.
I think just be open to the solutions that your players come up with. When you are planning a game, all you need to come up with are the great, interesting problems and complexities in the world. Let the players come up with the answers. Because it's no fun for them to sit there and try and guess your one right answer. Like as a 4th grade teacher, like nobody likes tests. Like trust me on that. So if you have your game become a test where they have to find your one answer you came up with, that's no fun. But if they get to use their creativity and problem solve, they're going to come up with things you would never have thought of and are so much better. So just go with the flow and let that happen. And that's that much less prep you have to do.
Absolutely. There's actually a really funny book series that I've been reading for the last couple of years. It's called Critical Roles. Is anybody here familiar with it by any chance? It's basically, without getting too deep into it, it's about a bunch of players who are playing with the new DM. And this DM is a real kind of just like heel. And they piss him off like in the first 20 minutes. And so he's like, hey, you know what? Let's just start over. Here, I have some really cool dice. Use these to roll for initiative. And he gives them all a die. And they all roll. And when the die finish rolls for each of them, they disappear and they wind up in the fantasy world. And so now they're stuck in this world and they're trying to find a way out. But one of the people who's playing has never played D&D before. And so he decides to become a wizard, and he decides on his first spells. And one of his spells that he gets is horse. And it's like 9 books long now. People, the amount of times horse has saved this guy's life. Like they keep coming up with the most outrageous ways for the spell summon horse to save this dude is freaking amazing. And it really goes to show that when players are given a rich just area to play with, and DMs don't limit them, you tend to come up with some really interesting solutions. So I think that's absolutely a fantastic suggestion. Whenever you have a chance to use summon horse, right? So,
exactly.
And
bad horse.
On that note, people like to be right. You know what I mean? So if you have someone who's like in their basement with a bunch of red string and like maps on the wall,
right?
Like, don't let them be right every time, but like that time when they're right, that serotonin release is going to be so intense, and they're going to be so happy. That's what that kind of player wants to be rewarded with.
I had an entire campaign change on a dime when one of my players went, "Of course, it's X because of this, this, and this," which was not at all what I was planning, but it was such a brilliant idea. I went, "You figured me out."
Yeah, exactly. The yes and goes
Michael,
for
you
DMs too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, you had a comment as well.
Oh, just if you try to George R. R. Martin your way through it and say, well, I'm not going to do anything that they have said out loud they think is happening, all you're going to do is make them feel like they are never right and they can't figure it out ever, and they're going to stop trying. You want to increase their incentive to be emotionally invested, not decrease it. Don't punish them for caring.
I mean, it is a tacit agreement between the players and the DM that they're the heroes. So they have to be right sometimes. You got to give it to them.
Don't punish them for caring should be the name of this panel, by the way.
Yeah.
I like that.
I like that. Don't punish them for caring. Yes, absolutely. But Gary, we haven't given you a chance to make a suggestion. So what would be your number one rule for new DMs or GMs?
We've hit a lot of the big ones, the figure out what you want, figure out what your players want, make sure you're on the same page. The one that has really improved my games and game mastering is kind of touching off what we just went over, in that don't try to railroad it. Don't try to, one of the GMs I used to have that drive me up the wall, he would go, well, we've got to do this because I have a scene in mind. It's like, you're not writing a book.
It's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
Yeah. So it's like, for my advice for a new DM would be, come up with who your bad guy is. Know what their goal is. Maybe they have a plan, but be ready for that plan to be wrecked the second the players step into it.
Right.
I defined my GM style as ages of, I strap myself onto a rocket. I ignite it. I've got a hammer. I bang on the rocket fins every now and then to try to make it go in a direction, and I'm just along for the ride.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
And so
that's a very good way. That's actually a really good way of describing what a DM basically is. That it's just, you're hopefully trying to go in the general direction in which you're trying to land your rocket. And chances are you're not going to do it.
Yeah. Come up with a few set pieces. Try to come up with ways to make it interesting. Like, don't just have them fight the bad guy in a castle. Have them fight on the breaking parapets in a thunderstorm.
Right.
Or have it the lava wombats break free and be rummaging around as well.
I hate the lava wombats. They're terrible.
I now need lava wombats in my game.
See, you just gave Jeff an idea. Jeff's like, lava wombats.
So your players are there to have a good time. Hopefully you're there to have a good time, and just run with it.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, a lot of this keys up to my biggest suggestion. My suggestion is actually a mantra of mine that I use, and I've used it since I was a teenager, because my very first game experience, and I'm going to ask each of you about your first game experiences here in a moment. The group I was with, they were teenagers. They were very kind of full of themselves, as most teenagers are. And while they needed players, they weren't receptive to having players. So it was very much a combative scene where I'm here and I'm trying to play with them, and they just weren't making me feel welcome. But I wanted to be in that world, and I got a lot of no, you can't. So my mantra has been basically since then, yes, and the philosophy basically is this. it costs me nothing to tell you, okay, let's see what happens if we go down that route. Sometimes we talk about it outside of the game as a group. Sometimes we actually go through that scenario. But 9 times out of 10, the yes and approach allows me to let the players feel heard, let them feel like they're contributing to the story, and let them feel like they're actually moving the plot forward.
Yeah.
Every time I say no, I feel like I'm limiting their input, which puts me back in the mind of 14-year-old Sean, feeling like I don't have a voice in this game. I'm just there to fill a seat. And it's a much more enjoyable experience when you say yes, and then what happens next. And honestly, if you're an actor or if you've gone through drama, you know that there's a very famous exercise called yes and that's what I kind of base it off of, which is, okay, this is what's happened, what happens next? And if you get into that philosophy of allowing players to do the completely ridiculous things that they come up with to do. And let's be fair, if you give players rope, they'll hang themselves 9 times out of 10. You don't have to worry about it. They'll find a way to put themselves in mortal peril without you coming up with death traps. Yeah. All you have to do is give them the rope. That's really your job, is to just come up with really inventive ways. And it does mean being a little bit more light on your feet, mentally speaking. But the rewards are these incredible scenarios that you never would have come up with otherwise. Yeah.
Watch some improv classes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, improv classes are really, really important. But like I said, the whole philosophy of yes and for me came from my very first experience as a player. And I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about it. And then I want you guys to tell me how your experience as a player was for the first time. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be your very first game, but the first experience where you really remembered that session. Mine, unfortunately, is a negative experience. And I'm giving this to you because I want you to see what this DM did wrong. So I was 14 years old and I would go to my friend's house, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to call anybody out on the internet. But he would invite me over and we would sit around, and I barely understood how the mechanics of the game worked. And so as a 14-year-old kid, they just hand me the player's handbook and they say, just make a character. And I'm completely lost. And at 14 years old, I'm one of those people, if it's not explained to me in very clear-cut rationale, I tend to feel overwhelmed and I tend to just not want to engage. But I like the idea of playing in this fantasy world. I love The Lord of the Rings. I loved reading fantasy novels. So I wanted to be in this fantastical world with dragons and wizards and knights and so on and so forth. So I endured trying to understand this game, and I made a horrible character. And so I keep going to this game session over and over again with these characters, and we're just going along through the woods trying to do stuff. And we would have these moments where you see a path and you can go left or you can go right. And we would say, okay, we want to go right. And the DM describes a big hunking, castle off in the distance. We're like, okay, well, that's stupid. Let's go left. And then you start to go left. You see the same castle in the distance. And it's classically what is known as a railroad, which is maybe one of the worst things you can do as a game master. So we go to this castle, and basically every chance we had to make a decision other than what he wanted, he just came up with an infinite plethora of reasons as to why we could not do option B, C, D, or E.
Sure.
And I hated that. So I finally said so. And so his response was to take my character sheet, tell me that I had just gotten hit by some death trap. No, he didn't rip it, Jeff. He lit it on fire.
What?
Lit it on fire. Watched it burn up to about this far to his hand, and then put it in a garbage pail. And he said, "Your character has died."
I don't mean to laugh.
I know.
I'm sorry.
Like, hold on. I gotta go to Ann here. Hold on. This is the Ann's face. Like, Ann's just like, what? Just that's
like not okay on so many levels. It's not okay. And I'm very upset about something that happened in your past, and I feel like I'm just like a ghost on the wall, like looking in at your fate, and I don't like it. I don't care for it.
Yeah, 26 years ago this happened, and I still remember it plain as day. I remember his room, and this is one of those guys who thought that it'd be more moody if we had a red light bulb in our room, so we're always playing in red light. So we're playing it was the late 80s, early 90s. Oh no, it was the early 90s. It was a different time for D&D. But that was my first experience, and I hated it so much that I swore I would never be that kind of DM. And I have gone out of my way. It literally shaped my entire way of playing it. And the irony is, one of the guys from that game, years later, during a storyteller game, actually, Michael, we were playing Vampire. We were playing, and he didn't like the fact that they had so many options. So his response was, I don't want to play anymore. So he was playing a vampire. He just walked outside, and he lit his character sheet on fire. So I think it's that group, like that's how they kill each other, is they light their sheets on fire. I don't know. Like it's like
this seems like you're enacting some kind of dark demonic ritual, and I feel like you don't read the Latin and you don't burn character sheets. Like those are the rules,
right?
At my table from here on out.
So, right, like new a policy right now. Don't burn your character sheet. But yeah, that was a horrible way of getting introduced to it. But amazingly enough, I still loved the idea behind them, and I went off and I found a game system that I enjoyed, which turned out to be the storyteller system, and I played that for years. And I came back to D&D, a decade and a half later. But I would love to know some of your experiences as first-time players, and I hope that your experiences are better, and maybe one of the lessons that you learned as a result from that to be a better DM. Does anybody want to go first, or you want me just to randomly pick a person?
That's random. Terrifying. Roll a die.
Random. I'm not going to roll a die, but I'm going to say Kimmy, since Kimmy said roll a die. I like that was the best gamer response that we've had. So what was like your first gaming experience like, and how did that shape you as a DM?
I think I'm going to tell like not my first one. Like I did the whole like middle school try and play D&D, get bored, reading the book, start play video games thing like many times with my friends. I think the one that really kind of like launched where I am now is actually with 4E after we made fun of the commercial. It's kind of what brought me and a bunch of my friends back to the hobby. After years and years, and we all worked at the Renaissance Fair together. We all performed songs and things like that. We had a couple.
That's awesome.
Oh, you're cool. Like, watch, we know each other. If we wore costumes, we'd be like, "Oh, I know you."
Yeah, absolutely.
But I was in a band called the Merry Wives of Windsor, and a bunch of my friends were in a band called the Poxy Boggards, and we hung out all day. And on the weekends, we'd sing these songs. We'd be there all day, and we'd talk about D&D. And then 4E got released, and we were like, hey, let's like try gaming together outside of singing together. So my friend Stu started a 4E game because it was like the new hotness. So we all jumped in on that. And oh man, those like 6 to 8 hour combats were something with that system, man. Oh man, one person does one thing wrong and your night is boned.
That's true.
But it was so neat to get back into the hobby, and also with like people that were so like-minded about it. And that was kind of the start of, we were like, hey, we have a recording studio because we're musicians. Let's, talk about it and record it and see if anybody listens. And here we are like 12 years later. So I don't know, it's fascinating for me. That particular game was great. They released a bunch of stuff for 4E. I was immediately drawn to the Raven Queen stuff. And none of it had been released yet. So they hadn't actually so I wrote this whole like manifesto, my whole own take on what the Raven Queen was. All we knew was like she was a creepy like death raven goddess thing. So I wrote this cool thing about balance, and then they wrote their whole thing, which I didn't like as much, but whatever.
Well, that's okay. That's why you have your own game system now. Exactly. So exactly right. So that's your supplement under the open license. So there you go.
But I think that was the thing that really brought me back into it, because I've spent a lot of years role playing in MMOs and talking Elvish and things like that, because I'm a big nerd. That doesn't go anywhere on a resume, unfortunately, as a second language. But
disagree.
You know what? One day it will. You're going to find that perfect job, and they're going to say, "Man, I wish you knew Elvish." You're like, "Well, guess what?" And
when you are Sindarin. All right. So.
Okay, so I want to bounce to Jeff for a minute, because we also had a request from the audience, which is, Jeff, can you please tell us what D&D was like in the ancient times?
God damn it. All right, look. All right, I'm going to tell you what D&D was like in the ancient times, you sons of bitches. All right, here we go. So the year was 1980. Okay. My first introduction to the game was, in 1980, there was nothing to do in the summer but go to the community pool and play outside and climb trees and ride your bike and stuff. So I was about 10 years old at the time. 8. I was 8 years old at the time. Sorry, don't want to make myself older than I actually am. And I was sitting there, and they would do these things called adult swims, where all the kids have to get out of the pool for like a half an hour so the adults can swim uninterrupted. And we would just kind of sit around. And they had these picnic areas in the back near the snack bar. And I kept seeing these teenagers, young teenagers, like 12, 13-ish, were always back there huddled over all these books and notebooks and papers, and they kept rolling dice. So I slowly crept closer like a nervous woodland creature, and would perch on stuff and watch them. And one day, they were like, "Hey, do you kid, do you want to come play D&D? And I was like, play what? And they introduced me to, this was I think the red box set had either just come out or
that sounds about right. Yeah, it was like 80, 81, something like that.
That
sounds about right. Yeah,
because my first set was the red box set, so I'm not sure if that was what they started me with. And that was back when the classes were fighter, magic user, elf, and dwarf were classes. It was stuff like that. It was crazy. It was a great first experience. I was a nightmare for that DM, and bless that guy's heart, he didn't get upset when I was convinced my character needed to speak the language of Sturge. He went I don't know why. I saw it in the monster manual, the little handout thing, and I was like, clearly he didn't have a language, and I want to speak flying proboscis bird language. And he was like, fine, man, whatever. But so I played for a long time back then. But the game back then was very different than what it is today.
Definitely.
It was very much the DM is your opponent. It was very much railroady. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but we could maybe talk about that later. But it was very much a turn-based. Here's what happens. What do you do? Okay, now let's move on to the next little set of scenarios. And games like that for me, it was like that for a long time. And personally, I enjoyed it because I enjoyed getting in the headspace of the crunchiness of the lore and all that. I loved it so much. But what I learned when I took a break from RPGs for a while in my late 20s, early 30s, and I realized coming back to the hobby, I looked back at all of those things. And I said, okay, I want to start running a game, but I want to do it differently than I learned it. I want to make it accessible to people that maybe don't know how to play. And I spent time thinking about how to take the turn by turn. Here's the very harsh mechanics of it away and modify how I tell the story to make it easier for people that don't understand it yet to feel welcome. And it's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but I don't want to spend a lot of time getting into that process in my head.
Well, I definitely think that you're hitting on something that I think most DMs and GMs hit on eventually, which is how is it best served to have an enjoyable experience? And when you're in D&D, back in the day, it was very rigid. And in some cases, it's gotten more rigid.
It was a war game.
Yeah, it was a war game. And in other cases, they've opened it up in some really interesting ways. So when you're in between that, the science of D&D was either you were helping develop it or you were just kind of just shooting off the cuff. And honestly, I don't see anything bad with any of those approaches. I think that the approach that works best for you and your group is quite honestly what will ultimately lead to your enjoyment. If you find something that clicks, it may not click with group B, but if it's clicking with your group, then that's ultimately what you need. And adjusting that to each party is going to be one of your big takeaways. But no, I definitely get that. So I want to go to Michael next because I know, Michael, you were talking early about the fact that you had started with the storyteller system. So I'm interested to hear about your early days of using gaming or gaming in general.
Well, the very first game I played was a game of AD&D Second Edition Player's Option, in which the DM just needed another body at the table. And
sounds familiar.
Did not do a ton of explaining the system, and got very frustrated when I would ask things like, can I bank this arrow shot off of that mirror or whatever?
Right.
And a lot of times the answers were, the game doesn't let you do that. And I would get really frustrated and say, well, why doesn't it? Because it's our game. And eventually it culminated in me saying aloud in the middle of a D&D session, why can't I just buy a gun? And then somebody said, we should play Vampire. And so then I went and played Vampire and found a system where I could do feasibly, I could try anything I could put my mind to, and where the Vampire the Masquerade Second Edition Storyteller's Guide talks explicitly about let players try stuff, and your job is to get creative with figuring out what dice they need to roll for it. Your job is to enable that creativity, and so that really opened up my ability to enjoy it. Also, I was initially playing in a game where things were pretty adversarial. Like the GM really did see it as like it was his job to set a series of challenges that we were to defeat, and thus in some ways we were to defeat him. And like, I understand that just wasn't a philosophy that I was prepared for.
Right.
Whereas in the storyteller system, everything really did feel much more like, hey, let's play a game together in which 4 of us are going to have characters and like really specific agency around a very specific set of resources in the world. And this other person is going to basically try to be everything else that we can imagine we want to interact with.
Right.
And so that was a very different experience. And also it was just like more to my aesthetic. You know, it was the 90s and I was a big goth, and everything worked out nicely. I, could wear my big black trench coat to the vampire game and be right at home.
No, definitely. And it's funny, we're having a private chat while we're also talking, and we all agree that I should have made this panel like 4 hours long. There's just no way we're going to be able to cover everything that we want to. And you know what? That just means maybe like, in a week or two, maybe I can get it right back together, and we'll come back and do like a bonus panel or something. But Anne, I want to get to your answer. What was like your first experience like, and how did that shape you as a DM game master?
So I played in high school. I went to boarding school. And it was just like Harry Potter. That's the first question everybody asked me. It was just like it, magic and all. No, but I played because a teacher I had, I was friends with his daughter, and so she invited me to come, like, leave campus and come over for the weekend. And she had this older brother who loved Dungeons and Dragons and said like, oh, I can like run a game for you guys. And so it was a very strange game because it wasn't balanced and it wasn't classic, but I remember like the teacher was one of my theater teachers, and he had all these like weapons and stuff on the wall. And so my first experience was like sitting in a basement with a really good friend and like her older brother, who I was also friends with, just like telling this story. And then he would, we would find a long sword and he would take it off the wall and let us like hold it. And I was like, oh, this is the best ever. I'm such a badass, like I was totally...
It looked like just a dollop of LARPing almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was just like, he really focused on making it fun. And I honestly could not tell you anything about that character except that she was a half elf ranger, and that we were playing 3.5. I couldn't tell you anything we did that night, but I just remember the feeling of it. And then in all of my notebooks, I would just draw this character, and then I would think, what if I was the GM? What if I came up with a story? Fast forward years later, right? Because the first experience that I ever had that like brought me, like laid me low at a table happened in 5th edition. And it was the first time I had a character death. And it was the last session of Storm King's Thunder. And it was just me and the cleric left standing. Everybody else was dead. Dead or dying. And we were very close, and we were underwater, and there were we were fighting a giant kraken, which doesn't spoil Storm King's Thunder for anyone, because our GM was like, I'm going to do what I want. So that's not the big bad for literally anyone else who plays this campaign. But we were fighting this giant, like, eldritch infused kraken, and I swam in. I just knew in that moment that it was now or never, and I knew that I would probably die if I did this, but that we weren't going to win if I didn't try. And I swam into its mouth and cast inflict wounds or something. I can't remember what I cast, but it was something that gave it negatives to dexterity saves. And then the next I managed to survive for 1 round inside its mouth, and then I cast like inflict wounds and killed it, and then it was like crushed under falling rocks, and there was no getting out of that scenario.
Right.
But I remember knowing what I was choosing to do in that moment. And then something else happened at the table where like somebody wasn't happy with their character dying, and they flipped out and threw a huge fit at the table, and we never got to finish.
Did anyone burn a character sheet?
Did anybody burn their sheet?
We were mad, but no character sheets were burnt.
So it was still a better experience than me. So there you go.
Yeah, and you know the thing that I realized in that moment as a GM, as I watched our GM try to like, this goes back to my commentary from the first question. The very first question that we answered is like, I could see him like going back in time, like through the void, getting sucked backwards, looking at all these strings of like, how did I create this problem?
Right.
On the last day of something we have all been working on for 3 years. How did I do this? What have I wrought? And this guy just packed up his books and walked out.
That sucks.
And it really sucked because I felt bad for him, but I remember just crying and crying and crying because like I just wanted to like see us be mourned.
Yeah.
I wanted to see us save the world, and we never got to. And so
one
now
of the coolest things they could have done right there is they could have you could have been playing secondary characters and you would have heard about the death of the first characters. That would have been a really cool way of handling that.
Yeah,
and you missed that opportunity.
There were so many opportunities for it. Like there were other things set in motion where, you know, our GM could have just given us a bit of an epilogue. You know, we didn't need to be in control of it, because that's a gift that your GM can give a party is like, and here's what happens afterwards, you know?
Absolutely.
And I was really excited for that. And I just kept telling myself while I was sitting there dead and the rest of the like party was rolling death saves as we tried to like wrap up the combat, like we're just going to know what happens now, and I'm going to be able to seal this experience. And I feel kind of like I opened the door to something awful, and like it never got out again.
Right.
Like and so now when I'm dealing with character death at the table as a GM, I remember that like it's important to, in whatever way you can, memorialize that character death for your players. If they are dying, it's not like you have to go into slow motion and everything is this huge deal, but at some point in some way you have to instigate it, either because an NPC asks, you know, where's Jareth, you know, or because the players themselves are very into role play and want to talk about what happened back there. You know, you have to let that happen and you have to let them reckon with it. And it's, you know, I was lucky in my case because I chose where I was going, right? Like I chose to take that action that I knew was really, really probably going to be the end, but not everybody gets that, especially in the lower levels. Sometimes someone just goes down real fast, insta death, doesn't even get to roll death saves. And it's just really important to remember to give them some kind of moment and to help, and also to remind your players that like, always have another idea that you're excited about. And also that it's okay. Like if you're upset, let's talk about it now. Let's not wait until you blow up and pack up your books and leave.
Right. That's not a very good solution. No, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I've actually heard in other groups the term clause 13, meaning that the GM can extend to the group the option to never let a character death be permanent. And that makes you think immediately, well, there are no consequences for anything, but that's not true, because that doesn't mean that there aren't creative consequences.
I actually did that once. I had a TPK. I had an unexpected TPK that it came out of nowhere, and they all died. And I basically gave them an out. I was like, okay. And I came up with a really good, as I called it, a bullshticka way of doing it. And I let one of my players make a comment during the middle of it. And that one comment changed the entire scope of that game. And that game lasted like 7 years. And this happened like in year 2. The last 5 years was us dealing with the consequence of her opening up her damn mouth at the wrong time and giving me an idea.
Tell me it was Christina.
It was Christina. Yeah, it was Christina, my buddy Christina. And she derailed us so hard, but it was such a great thing. So we were able to take a TPK that could have ultimately dissolved that group. And it turned into something that lasted for another 5 years because, you know, ultimately it was a good thing to go for. But it was funny. We keep talking about, did you burn the character sheet? I did want to say, I never have gotten a memorial for that character. I still remember his name. His name was Liffen. So if anybody wants to, hashtag RIP Liffen.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. This is Farrah Beestinger. I keep her on my shelf beside me because she never got a memorial. Her arm broke off because it was eaten by the Kraken, aka my cat knocked it off the shelf. Don't think about it too much. Or you'll I mean, I think it's important to let people hold on to that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and here's one of the things that Sorry, Gary. It's one of the things to keep in mind is, as the DM, you're not God. God's one of your NPCs.
Right.
you can rewrite whatever happened.
Yeah.
If somebody does end up throwing an X card, or if someone has a stupid death,
Yeah.
you can go, okay, wait, time. We're rewriting this.
Yeah. Right.
Because the goal is to have a good time.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
or you can say the gods are not done with that character and they get quantum leaped into somebody else's body in the world.
Yeah.
And now they have to come back and find their corpse and get themselves resurrected. And that's a fascinating story to tell.
That's a great idea. I love that idea.
A million ways to deal with it. A friend of mine was running Curse of Strahd, and in the first 2 sessions, one of the players died. So just quickly, he was like, guess what? You're coming back as a Revenant for the rest of the campaign. And it was like a genius. It fit the theme,
Right.
Absolutely.
He got to still be the same character, but have like an additional kind of bent to him. And it worked for that game. You can always work around stuff like that.
Just make sure if you're the DM and you're doing something like that, just make sure you check with the player first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Everybody, some people want it to be over and close that book and open another book. And again, that's all of these tips come down to communication. You have to be able to communicate. And as the GM, it's like, it is your responsibility to make sure that you are as aware as you can possibly be of feedback that people have about the way they're feeling about things. I always tell people at the end of a session that I'm running, like, hey, by the way, does anybody have any things they want to talk about today? We do this on Thursdays on my Twitch channel. We play a Starfinder game. And so we play for about 3 hours. And then for half an hour, we answer questions from the chat. But we also talk about good and bad, because I just felt it was important for us to model that behavior of being like, you don't leave the table, close your book, and then go think about how pissed off you are.
Right.
Like, if you didn't like something, like,
I always tend to end a game with, any questions, comments, or criticisms.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, get that feedback.
Yeah, I ask that a lot, and then a lot of times people are just going to go, no, it's good. And I'm like, I hate that. Is like the worst answer you could ever give a DM. Yeah, it's good. Like, give us a little something more. Like, I really like that you did this, and I look forward to the next game. Something, for the love of God.
I think sometimes it's important to say, like, if you need to think about it, like, I'm available during the week, like, always happy to chat to you, because some people just don't want to talk about if they do have like the inkling of hey, I didn't really like the way that played out, or like, I kind of want to do this with my character instead when we come back. Yes, Starbuck and does do that therapy hour after the game. It's true. And some people need to talk about that stuff in private, and sometimes you need to facilitate some kind of communication between two players. And nothing will piss me off more because of that, being so triggered by that experience of my friend closing the book and leaving the table and kind of like ruining it for himself and literally everybody else.
Yeah.
Which I understand, where he was coming from in that moment. But I never want to put anyone in that position. And so because of that, you have to be the leader, and you have to be willing to have difficult conversations in a clear, unbiased, and loving way.
Yeah. Now, Gary, I in a clear, unbiased, and loving way, I am going to not ask you the question, because we are running a little low on time, and we do have a really great question actually from my wife Laura. And that just shows that I should have made this like a 2-hour panel. Gary's done. He's like, I'm out. I'm not going to play no more. But the question actually, and I want to leave this open for everybody. So just be polite and let other people talk, so that we don't like all over talk at the same time. But this question is extremely important. How, as a DM, do you handle problem players? And I think this is one of the questions that I think is asked most frequently. And I think that it is, quite frankly, not a silver bullet. And since we have 6 people here with vastly different opinions and how to get to stuff, I think it'd be a good conversation. How do you deal with problem players? Does anybody have something that you want to kind of kick off, and we can all start to tee off? Anybody?
Go ahead, Jeff. Jeff, please.
No, let Gary go, since he didn't get to answer the last question before he rage quits the stream.
Yeah, the first thing you got to know is you got to know your players. So if this is a new person that you've just picked up, either through you found them through a local gaming group or whatever, and you don't really know them, talk to them, find out why they're doing what they're doing. And sometimes you got to be harsh with look, what you're doing, it may be fun for you, but everybody else is having a bad time. If it's somebody you do know, then you should know why they're doing what they're doing. And you could he's like, hey, I understand that your character's a dick and you're just playing your character, but could you not be a dick to the rest of the party? I mean, that's I had one of my favorite gamers of all time. She would constantly play thieves, assassins, people that were dark and willing to kill everybody. But her golden rule that let her get away with this was you never F with the party.
Right.
And so, some people have a fun time at it because I had another friend who is like, I'm playing a loner. That's great. We're all over here.
Right.
We'll get to you. We'll get to you when we get to you.
Right.
If you're not going to run with the group.
It is a group experience. And there is, again, another tacit agreement that on some level you want to be there. I used to do, like when we were playing that game that lasted for 7 years, I said, nobody knows each other. You have to role play how you all become a team. And it took them a year before they actually trusted each other as players. And I was like, next group that we do, never again. So when we started, even though the same players were here, I was like, you guys all have to come up with your reasons as to why you're here. It's assumed that you all at least want to be around each other and can stand one another. So if you're an undead warlock and you're a holy cleric of, whatever the hell, you guys got to find a way to get along with one another. There's a reason why you two are hanging out as besties. And that's between you and your makers.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And in the end, don't be afraid to eject somebody from the table if they won't behave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fire them from the game.
Yeah.
It's like, I still love you. You're my friend, but don't show up next week.
If you do session 0 properly, and I know that's like kind of judgmental and hammer droppy, but like if you really communicate with people properly, you'll know if there's somebody who doesn't fit then, and either may be able to make the decision that, hey, it's clear you don't want to play the same game that everybody else wants to play. A good question I always ask now that a friend of mine asked when we were playing Cats of Cthulhu, which I couldn't recommend more, is
I just love it for the name alone.
I was really struggling. I was like, I'm confused. Is this we're cats, but like, is this a cartoon? Like, is this the Aristocats? What is it? And she was able to say, like, it's an Edward Gorey piece. It's T.S. Eliot. It's dark and it's serious, but you're still cats, so you can smirk, and being able to explain to people kind of what the genre is within the fantasy or whatever can really help them figure out, like, oh, well, I shouldn't be a meme machine or a murder hobo like that farts fire. I mean, or be that, I guess. Fine, there's a table for you somewhere.
I mean, sometimes you want to. I mean, sometimes you want to be a murder hobo who has fiery farts. I mean,
but maybe that's not what's going to work with this group. And I think Sean really pointed out something that I hold very dear is I don't allow people to make characters. If somebody comes to me and says, I want to make a ranger with the Outlander feat that hates other people and won't talk to anybody, I'll say that is the one time where I will say, I want to encourage you to find a reason why you need these people. And it can be, I have some dark thing I need to accomplish, so I need to make these people like me so they'll feel like they owe it to me to do this thing. Like, whatever it is, but you have to want to be around those people or it does not work.
Yeah. There are a couple of ways mechanically to achieve this. And the simplest one is to make everyone add to their character sheet, regardless of system, a section called Friends, Family, and Followers. Who are the people who know you? Whom do you know? And why do you care about them? And if they don't have an answer for that, if they don't put anything in that section of their character sheet, they're not finished making their character sheet. A more complicated version of that is steal from Fiasco. Make everybody sit in a circle, and each player has to work out with the character on either side of them, with the player on either side of them, why do their characters know each other, and why do their characters want to help each other? If they can be the undead cleric and the priest who hates undead people, as long as you put them across the circle, because then they still both got allies on either side. They've got a way to relate to the group.
Yeah. Now, Kimi, you've been very quiet. I was going to toss to you because I was like, we haven't given her a chance to talk lately. So, Kimi, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm going to do a shameless self-promotion with this. I actually designed a game called Decima that uses tarot cards to do this exact thing. It builds backstory between the characters, between the PCs, and builds their history together. And the like locations and stuff for your campaign. That it's designed to be used as part of like a session 0. So yeah, I love, this is one of the best things about a game and setting up a game.
Did I spell that right? Did I spell that right?
Yeah, that's perfect. Decima, yeah, the R&D for your RPG. And yeah, like Anne was saying, like
I hit the wrong button. Sorry.
Okay. Going over those safety tools first is going to be the tell. You're going to be able to tell if someone's going to be a good fit or not. You're going to do, you know, when you set up your lines and veils, hopefully something you have as part of that, you're going to see, oh, that's not matching. And especially when you present those lines and veils to the group, you're like, hey, these are the things we're going to completely avoid. These are the things that we might hand wave or fade to black on. Right. You know, someone's going to be like, well, I want that in the game. And you're like, and then you can have like those critical conversations. That's the number one thing to deal with difficult players. And then, you can't be afraid of a lot of games at conventions, and you have no idea who's coming to your game then. So it's like they put their name on the sheet, and you cross your fingers.
And those are nerve-wracking experiences. Oh my god,
rough stuff.
Especially as a woman and a femme GM, it's scary sometimes. I've had some pretty terrible experiences, but you can't be afraid to just be like, hey, you know what, this is not okay. This is not going to be included in my game. I don't suggest you necessarily take that step if it's people you've been with for a long time. I think you can be a little more, I think we want to go a different direction. But if there's someone who's truly being heinous, because they are out there, bring out your teacher voice and be like, I'm sorry, you're leaving the table now.
Yeah, and you know what? There's nothing wrong with protecting the group over the one, and it's so critical when you do that, because when you're in those moments and you have 6 people who are trying to get along, and one of them, or 6 people who are trying to play a group collective game, and one of them is just absolutely wanting to go do their own thing, then 9 times out of 10, I'm like, well, go do your own thing by yourself. I mean, there are people who will do one-on-one sessions with a DM, where it's just DM and the player. And those are perfectly acceptable scenarios. But again, it's a tacit agreement. If you're in a group with 3, 4, 5 other players, including the DM, you are there to at least try to find a way to make it work. It is beholden to you as a player, just as it is beholden to the DM to make sure that they give you a world where you can actually spread your creative wings and fly a little bit. You have to give them a little bit of sky. You can't just take over everything. You got to give a little bit of freedom of movement. Otherwise, you're going to bang heads a lot. And ultimately, because the DM is the DM, which means they're the referee at the end of the day as well, if you're not going to step up and do your part, you're out.
I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about is what happens after that problem player has been removed or has left. And I think it's really important. I think it's really important that you give players the option of like ending that story for those characters or staying with it, because I have lost access to playing like in their story that they were made for way too many characters because a game like had to stop because of one of those things, but we kept everybody and we just started a new campaign. And as a GM, there is nothing worse than like prepping. And like, I love including people's backstories and like really weaving that into even pre-written campaigns if I'm not doing a homebrew thing. And I don't want to lose that work, those gifts that I have slaved over for those characters. So if they want to stop the game because they just have a bad association with it and don't want to continue, that's totally fine. But I always give them the opportunity if this comes up, and I like to be given the opportunity when I'm a player of, let's just say that person left the party, these things happen, and we continue and make the decision. Did that character, like, do they still exist as an NPC? Do they not? Do they just, like, what's going to work for everybody? Talk about it. You don't have to let it all just happen at the table. Talk about how you want to do it and move forward, because if I hadn't done that, I would have like not gotten to finish, I think, 2 campaigns where like I'm really excited about being able to finish them because a player had to leave. One, because someone like they got pregnant and they were like, well, I can't play now for like 2 years because I just know that that's not going to be my life. Right.
And there is a rule of thumb about, hopefully you know who your players are coming in, so, but we're talking about those sneak attack jerks that kind of develop over time, because sometimes you don't know, like they seem to be very on the level, and then they kind of go south as the game starts. So you can't really control that. But I hate to say that we're running out of time, folks. I gotta put a pin in this. But I would love.
So
I'm going to make
episode 2.
Right. I'm going to make an open offer. I would love to have the 5 of you back, and let's continue this conversation sometime down the line.
Yeah, sure.
Let's do it.
A week or two down the line. Let's try to put our schedules together. Let's try to get back, because I think honestly this could be a series of panels that we could do, like just ongoing, very easily, and we can answer more questions and whatnot. And I think this is a resource that I think a lot of people would really value. But I just wanted to say
we've just barely started.
Really, I mean, we're just starting to get into the nitty gritty of it. It's like, damn it, we have to stop. And I'm so sorry. But we are going to be doing a follow-up panel to this a little bit later on this evening, which is D&D tips for players, which there is going to be some cross pattern on this, because as you can see, it's very much a collaboration between the two. So it's not just going to be exclusively DM or exclusively players. It's very much a collaboration and a blending of those two types when you have a game. But just real quick, I wanted to say again, thank you to everybody who's watching. But really, I want to say just huge props for making this panel so much fun. To Jeff, the Mighty Jerd, to Anne for Heartsinger Games, to Michael for Michael G. Williams Books, Gary for the American Sci-Fi Classics track, and of course Kimi with Golden Lasso Girl Games, and what was it, Dekuma, correct?
Dekuma, yes.
Dekuma. So everybody should go check that out.
Yes, I want that.
That sounds so great. For all of you who've been watching this entire time, I do hope that you will come back at 3 o'clock. We will be doing a retrospective on Deep Space Nine. It should be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to get into that conversation. But again, I just want to say thank you guys so much. It has been such a fun day so far. Keep coming back. Watch more Pop Pop Con Con. Thank you. And if you do get a chance, make sure to go check out our Pop Cycle Bobble Shop. It is open for a limited time. We are going to be closing it in a week or two. So if you want to get some stuff early on for your holidays, make sure to go check that out, and it'll just help Laura and me continue to do fun stuff like this and also see you in the future. So again, thank you so much, everybody. You were all wonderful guests, and I can't wait to talk to you more about this.
Of course.
Yes.
Awesome.
Take
Thanks,
care, guys. And we will see
Take care.
you at 3 o'clock for Deep Space Nine retrospective. Bye.